Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Chang, and the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel, and it's where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. And a critical reality of our political world is the strong support for Trump among conservative white evangelicals. But why? Why do conservative white evangelicals support Trump? Now, I believe the real answer is actually multi-layered and it's complex. But if we take evangelical leaders at their word, the top substantive reason offered by them for why they support Trump is abortion. That's the leading public narrative offered. We as evangelicals support Trump because we are united on the abortion issue. But for a while last week, that alliance got strained. And I think how it got strained and how both Trump and conservative evangelicals desperately sought to repair that strain was very illuminating. And an important article that shed light on this dynamic was written by my good friend, Pete Wehner, who is also a frequent guest on Good Faith. Pete is an esteemed columnist at The Atlantic and the New York Times and a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. And so, Pete, welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. Welcome back.
Great to be with you, Curtis. Thanks. Always terrific to be in conversation with you.
Well, we've got a doozy for this week, and you helped us understand it better with your article. Now, for those who didn't follow the news events of these last few weeks on abortion, evangelicals, and Trump, can you tell the story, explain what has happened recently?
Yeah, what's happened is that Donald Trump has basically jettisoned his pro-life position, and now he's sort of going back and forth. But one thing that's happened is that the GOP plank in the Republican platform has been removed. So since the early 1980s, the Republican Party has been a consistently pro-life party, and that plank has been in there. And any effort to try and take it out, Arlen Specter was a liberal Republican who made efforts in 1984 and 1988, I believe, and years after that. And those were always rebuffed because the Republican Party was a pro-life party. Second thing is that there have been initiatives in Florida, 6-week ban on abortions or a ban on abortions after 6 weeks. And Trump has indicated that he actually thinks that that's too restrictive in terms of abortions. And then thirdly, on Truth Social, he sent out a statement in which he said that my administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights, which is basically using the language of those who are pro-choice. So that collection of issues, constellation of issues, sent a signal. And the signal that it sent is that Donald Trump was pushing away from abortion. And it's pretty clear why. It's because abortion is not popular since Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade. Abortion has become a more prominent issue in politics, and the country has turned strongly pro-choice. Trump knows that. He's worried that it's going to hurt him. So he's basically betrayed that cause, like he's betrayed virtually every other cause and person in his life. So that's the context. Some pro-life voices spoke out, and Trump now indicates that he's going to support that 6-week ban on abortion in Florida. But the damage has been done. He's revealed his hand. And one other thing, just for context, is for people to understand that Trump years ago was not only pro-choice, but he actually defended partial birth abortion. So, all of those things together has created some amount of turbulence in politics over abortion in the Republican Party.
Well, it's important to emphasize that even with the recent reversal, the flip-flopping and then flip-flopping back of Trump did on the Florida particular law, that central plank, which is the official statement of what the Republican Party stands for, that has not been reinserted, right? That is still out, and that was really at the behest of Trump. That wouldn't have happened unless Trump had moved that. Is that your?
That's exactly right. In terms of the platform, GOP platform, it is not a pro-life party as it once was, and that's a result of Donald Trump for sure.
So Observing all of the movements, both on the evangelical side and on the Trump side in the recent weeks, I was reminded of the game of Twister. If you remember that game, that
Right.
parlor
Yeah,
game,
sure.
where you're trying to remain connected, but you're under enormous strain and you have to contort yourselves in all these different strange positions in order to remain connected. That's what it felt like when I was reading statements by evangelical leaders and Trump trying to contort themselves to say, no, we're still connected. Can you analyze what's going on there? Why are they working so hard to at least maintain a public picture of, hey, no, we're still as tied together as before?
Yeah, I think the reason is that years ago, the Republican Party and the pro-life movement threw their hat over the Donald Trump wall, and they decided they were going to be with him. And the result of that is that there's virtually nothing that he can say or do to cause him to break from him. There are at times where they'll speak up, but often it has a kind of check the box quality, quite honestly, Curtis, and it's restrained in what they say. So I think what has happened is that the Republican Party and the pro-life movement has fused itself with Donald Trump, and there's very little at all that can be done to break that connection. I think that's the context.
Pete, one of the things I always appreciate about you is that you're a very astute observer of human psychology, infusing your political analysis with human sort of psychological realities. So give me your best take on what is going on among evangelicals, because at a rational level, you would say, look, this guy is completely willing to jettison you, and he's already done so in terms of removing and changing the character of the Republican Party. Is it that this was always a sham, that actually the abortion was just a cover for deeper reasons why they're supporting Trump? Or is there something more complex going on than that?
I think it's more complex.
Yeah.
Look, Donald Trump promoted the pro-life movement, and he's responsible for overturning Roe v. Wade, which has been for a half century one of the top priorities of the pro-life movement. So you can't deny him that. And during his term as president, he was promoting various pro-life initiatives, and one should deny that. So I think that helped the evangelical movement develop a loyalty to him and a kind of fidelity to him. And you'll remember, Curtis, in 2016, one of the things that helped solidify his support among evangelicals was when he came out with a list of names of court appointees, which is really from the Federalist Society, and that was to reassure the pro-life movement. So I don't think it was all cynical. I think that they felt like, look, this is an issue that's important to us, and Donald Trump is going to be much better, certainly, than Hillary Clinton, who was unambiguously pro-choice in her position, and the Democratic Party is in theirs. So that I think has to be taken into account. On the other hand, I think there's more to it than simply that. If it weren't the case, then you would see much more of an uproar than you've seen from the pro-life movement against Trump. I think that what happened is that for a lot of evangelicals, Trump became a kind of personification of what they wanted. They view him as a fighter for the things that they care about. The crudity, the cruelty, the conspiracy theories, the lawlessness. I think they were much more, or at least somewhat more, looked at it with more askance and trepidation, and were turned off by it, early on in 2016, 2017. But I think they made a kind of moral accommodation, which people do.
Yeah.
And the more Trump transgressed lines, the more they stood with him. The more they justified it, they rationalized why they had to do that, because they felt like, look, he's being attacked by the people that we hate, and he's going to be the best person for our cause. But over time, what happened is that what was a bug became a feature. Yeah. And I think that it increasingly took on the qualities of a kind of cult of personality around Donald Trump. Not in all respects, but enough, I think, to be worrisome. And I think that a lot of evangelicals, whether they know it or not, are drawn to some of the darker sides and impulses and actions of of Trump, I think they probably on some level understand or at least intuit the cognitive dissonance that it creates. Is how would a follower of Jesus be an enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump? But they've figured out ways to get around that. And because of the nature of human psychology, we're susceptible to that kind of thing. All of us are susceptible to that kind of thing.
I think one of the things also that is in play is human beings are deeply wired to want to avoid shame, especially the shame of being wrong. Like, I know that's true in me. Like, I do not want to talk to my wife. It is very hard to get me to admit that I'm wrong. It's sad. It's a bug. It's a flaw. It's a fault. It's part of my human fallenness. And to collectively ask, an entire population that put their trust in Trump and now has to confront that was a bad deal, was a bad bargain made on bad grounds. That psychologically it's very few people can actually navigate the moves you have to make to overcome the shame and the mission of prior mistakes, prior wrongs. And so I got to think that's in play. Don't you think, Pete?
Oh, I'm sure that's in play. And I think to complicate it even more is that for people who had supported Trump to turn against Trump would please the very people that they've grown to hate, which is the progressive movement, liberals, and the Democratic Party. And there's a phenomenon called owning the libs. It's a phrase that means that there's a certain psychic delight that a lot of people get, including Christians, which is anything that infuriates liberals and progressives is by definition good and by definition worth doing. And I think this idea that if we were to turn on Trump, it would please the critics of Trump is something that. And the people that we have tremendous antipathy. They've been our enemies, for their entire lives. Therefore, we don't want to do anything to bring them any measure of happiness or joy. Yeah. So I think that plays into it honestly as well.
Sure. And not only would it please your enemies, but it would be viewed as an act of betrayal by your friends, by your own tribe. And that is a huge psychic barrier for any of us to actually cross that line. And I think is another reason why it's just so hard for evangelicals who've previously aligned with Trump to actually go back on that, because it means going back on your social networks as well.
Right.
So Pete, I want to actually shift the topic because I don't actually want to talk about this so much from a Trump-centric perspective. I actually think what is a helpful conversation at this point, at least for me, is to use this as a jumping point on to talk about, on the evangelical side, how did we get caught in this game of Twister? Like, what happened? What were the moves we made that have gotten us ensnared in this game? And how do we potentially untangle ourselves in a better way? Pete, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, I think this was on the episode when you were talking about how do you actually talk to a Trump supporter? And you very wisely made the point that sometimes the really helpful conversation is to pair the conversation about the what you believe with the how you arrived at that belief, to understand the backstory behind that. Right. And that allows us to actually connect as human beings. So I actually want to do that now. I actually want to for me to express on my end, and then hopefully invite you to do it on your end, the actual positions we have in terms of abortion, and then the personal how we got there. So I'm going to start. And I want to say that, first of all, I view myself as pro-life. Okay, but if there was a bumper sticker that I would have to put on my bumper sticker, which I would never do that, but if I did, I would say, I'm pro-life, parentheses, but wait, let me explain, ... No, fortunately, that's never going to fit on a bumper sticker, so I'm just going to have to do it here. But what I mean by that is, when I say that I am pro-life, I mean I believe deeply abortion goes against God's best desires for human beings and human relationships, and that God desires that human beings practice a embrace and welcome of new life that can flower into full personhood and blessing for all involved. And an expression of this faith is to actually welcome and be open to new life, even when circumstances make that a challenging proposition, right? So that's what I mean when I say my position is pro-life. Now, let me tell the personal story for how I got there. I am actually, it was a unwanted pregnancy. So I'm the third in a family of three. My parents were blue collar workers in Taiwan, kind of barely scraping by. And I was an unexpected and unwanted third pregnancy. And my parents are not Christians, did not grow up in a Christian home. and my mom very seriously considered an abortion. I think it was pretty well into the first trimester. And so much so that she tells me the story, consulted medical professionals, was like right on the verge of having me as a embryo aborted. So she chose ultimately not to do, though, not for explicitly religious reasons, but just some intuition that she wanted this new life, and she wanted to see what it would flourish into and flower into. And my personhood now is the product of her decision. So it's deeply personal for me. And I myself have experienced the beauty, the wonder, I hope the blessing to the world of a new life coming into being and becoming a person and being in relationship with other persons and so forth. So that's how I arrived at that. And then I would say, as I became a Christian later on in my life, that my identification with being what was originally an unwanted embryo found expression. It found meaning. Like, oh, this God is a God that welcomes new life, that embraces new life, that seeks the flourishing of new life into personhood and personal relationships. It all sort of fit together and made sense, and how that is an expression of faith. So that my personal leads me to identify with the embryo in a case of abortion. But Pete, it also causes me to identify with the mother, because it's my mother that was in that situation. And I understand the pressures she was under, not just financial, but cultural as well. In a patriarchal society like Chinese culture, like the burden of child rearing would have fallen heavily on her, not my dad, on her. And she was weighing all of that and what that would mean for her life, and how it could compromise her ability to care for my two older sisters. And so it was a complex, agonizing human reality and I identify with my mom in that story, which leads me to my other, but wait, let me explain part of my pro-life position, which is I believe we as a society should work together, and I emphasize the work together, to lower abortion rates in a way that honors the disagreements and deep human complexities in play. Because that's the issue we're talking about. It is one that my mom would not have agreed with a Christian objection to abortion. She didn't subscribe to it. And there were deep human complexities in play. And so if we're going to work together to lower abortion rates, we have to do that in a way that honors these deep disagreements and complexities in play. And let me just say one final thing, and then I want to turn it over to you, Pete, is
Sure.
that position that I have of that we as a society should work together to lower abortion rates in a way that honors the disagreements and deep human complexities in play. That's not a lip service for me. That I actually hold that pretty deeply. And just as an expression of this, and I'm going to share a story at some personal risk here people may know, because I've shared this before, I've been doing this Redeeming Babel thing for 4 years. I've not taken a salary for this work. I actually make my living by running a consulting firm that serves mostly secular nonprofits and government agencies in California, especially Northern California, the Bay Area. About 15 years ago, I was approached by a secular progressive funder who was actually gotten money from who I'm sure was a conservative evangelical to actually fund consulting work, capacity building for a number of pro-life Christian crisis pregnancy centers in California. And I had to weigh whether or not to do that. And it was actually, I really had to weigh it really seriously, because in the Bay Area nonprofit sector is very, very progressive, very, very pro-choice, like ardently so.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I took this project and it got out, that there was a decent chance I would get canceled. Like my firm would actually, dry up, and my livelihood would dry up. And so it was a real choice for me to do that. And then one of the reasons I did that was like, wait a minute, this is actually an expression of my deep pro-life positions, because this is expression of society working together. It's a conservative evangelical funder working with a secular progressive foundation. And they're actually trying to partner together on something that they can agree on, which is, hey, let's actually support these crisis pregnancy centers, which, for those who don't know, these are centers run mostly by Christians, who are trying to offer pregnant women who are actually wanting to be open, to explore the possibility of not having an abortion and keeping an unwanted pregnancy. And they're finding oftentimes that in the secular medical practice, they can't find the room and space to explore truly and genuinely the complex human complexities, in play. And so these crisis pregnancies, at their best, create a non-judgmental, open space for women to actually explore that option. I thought that actually accords with my position deeply. And so I chose to actually take on those projects, and I've done that. I simply say that this is not just lip service for me. This actually shapes how I show up in the world publicly and show up what I do. And it matters enough that I'm willing to put my financial livelihood on the line for that.
Yeah,
So,
my story is somewhat different than yours, but I've considered myself pro-life throughout my adult life. But similar to you, I've always considered myself pro-life, but with caveats. Some of them may be a little bit different than you, but a lot of what you said has resonance. I mean, the reason that I'm pro-life is less scripture, quite honestly, because I think that the Christian case for a strict pro-life position seems a little stretch for me from the scriptures that they take.
yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with them. People will disagree on it. Honest and faithful and good-spirited people, fair-minded people disagree on it. I mean, for me, it was the biology and the science. What from fertilization on, if it goes fully to term, it's not going to turn out to be a giraffe. It's going to be a human. It's going to be a human being. And sonograms, right? Which is, you can see the development of the child at various points in pregnancy. And there's a reason that, a lot of people would have sonograms on their refrigerators and elsewhere. And obviously at some point along the lines of pregnancy, whether you're in the 6th, 7th, 8th month, ninth month, I mean, that's a human being. Yeah. And so I've always felt like we should give the benefit of the doubt to that entity and treat it with some degree of reverence. I'd say the caveats that I've had are severalfold. I don't think I've ever been able to live what I think is the logic of that position. And let me explain what I mean by that. One thing is I believe in, and I've always believed in, exceptions for rape and incest. And strictly speaking, the pro-life position would not allow those exceptions. They would say that's a human child at any point in pregnancy, and whether that pregnancy happened because of rape or incest, that child should not pay the ultimate price. So there's no room for the exceptions. Beyond that, it's just a biological fact that half of all pregnancies end in spontaneous abortions. Do we treat that? Should we treat that as the same thing as if somebody took a 2-year-old child, lined him up on the side of a building and put a bullet through his skull?
Yeah.
Is that morally the same? Is it viscerally the same? Is it in any respect the same? I've never felt that it is. Yeah. And I had an exchange in the 1990s. This was a fax exchange. This was pre-internet. And it was with a leading pro-life philosopher. And it was interesting that when I started the conversation with him, I basically said, look, I wanted to probe your thinking on this. Is that fine? And his attitude was basically, absolutely, kind of bring it on. And so what I asked him is, I said, if you were the governor of the state of Maryland and you could impose any penalty, morally speaking, without any political constraints, on a woman who has an abortion or a doctor who performs an abortion, what would you recommend? The death penalty, first, second, or third degree manslaughter charges? And it was very interesting in our back and forth as I probed his thinking. I knew he was having trouble with it when he said, I just want to make sure that this is an off-the-record exchange that we're having. And I kept trying to probe his thinking, which is, take me through the links of your moral logic. If you think this is the murder of a child and a woman is committing what is probably the most heinous act you could imagine, which is murdering her own child, surely, morally speaking, you must think that the penalties have to be as strong as possible. And he just wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was not going there as a tactic, because this was not a public exchange. It was a private one. I think on some level he understood, like a lot of people do, particularly early on in pregnancy, that we're not talking the same thing as when a child dies. And society itself has never really dealt with it
Well,
way.
and just let me interject to be clear: the classic pro-life position in Christianity for hundreds of years did not adopt that position. That is a very modern position that the modern pro-life position has added as a twist on the classic pro-life positions.
Well, that's right. That's right. And of course, in the Hebrew Scripture, this is one that people who are more sympathetic to the pro-choice position point out, but it's a legitimate one to consider, which is, what were the laws in Judaism? And if a woman was physically assaulted and the child died, or the entity died, however you want to describe it, it was not viewed, legally speaking, as the same thing as if a child that had been born had been killed.
And listeners, you can look up Exodus 21 verses 22 to 24. That's what Pete's referring to. So yeah. But keep going, Pete.
Yeah. So those issues were there, and as I struggled to figure out my own position, I felt like neither side is comfortable living with the ramifications of their position, because for the pro-choice side, the argument that I would make to them is, look, is there any point in a woman's pregnancy where you'd say, enough, if you can't go further? This is a human child. Yeah. And for many of them, they're very uncomfortable in saying that. And I think that's transparently problematic. But the problem with my position, which is, I'm just not sure. I don't think moments after fertilization, I don't consider that, morally speaking, the same thing as a 2-year-old child. Yeah. Yeah. And then the question becomes, for me, where along the continuum do you begin to make certain judgments and draw the line? Is it at brain waves? Is it when the fetus can feel pain? Is it some degree of awareness? Is it the capacity to live outside the womb? And if I were to choose any of those, on what basis do I choose it? Right. It's just sort of cafeteria style. It's completely capricious. So I'm aware of the weaknesses in my own argument. And so the way I ended up on this was to say, look, I think you should err in the direction of being pro-life rather than pro-choice, because at some point that entity clearly becomes a child. I don't believe that it's the same thing very, very early on. And that's what most Americans have that opinion too. But I just don't feel comfortable in coming up with the criteria. The other thing I'll say, Curtis, is I remember reading this in 1985. It was a column by Charles Krauthammer in the Washington Post on abortion. And I'll read you what Charles said, because it really resonated with me in terms of how I've thought about this issue. He said, there's not the slightest recognition on either side that abortion might be at the limits of our empirical and moral knowledge. The problem starts with an awesome mystery, the transformation of 2 soulless cells into a living human being. That leads to an insoluble empirical question. How and exactly when does that occur? On that, in turn, hangs the moral issue. What are the claims of the entity undergoing that transformation? Yeah. And he said that because of the complexity, both sides should be careful about their rhetoric, and it ought to engender a degree of humility when thinking about this most complicated moral issue, rather than absolute certitude and trying to destroy the people who hold a view different than yours.
Peter, I want to offer to you my take on the 3 contortions that the modern pro-life movement has added on top of the classic pro-life movement that I think has defined Christianity for hundreds of years. And this is a 3 twists that I think have been added on really since I would say the 80s, post Roe v. Wade, but really took off in the 80s and the 90s, and then has gotten a dramatic resurgence in recent decades under Trump. And I would categorize these as 3 additional twists onto the pro-life position that that you and I have basically been kind of talking around. And so the first is what you refer to as moral absolutism, is an absolute certainty that extends to your position in the pro-life movement, that especially extends to the notion that human personhood, not human life, but human personhood, full-blown personhood begins at conception, so that any act of abortion is murder, and supporters of abortion rights are murderers themselves. And so that moral absolutism, again, I think is a modern twist that, of course, dramatically shuts down any possibility of working together amid the complexities and disagreements, right? Because it's an absolute showstopper of a moral absolutist position. So that's one, moral absolutism. The second is that engagement equals enforcement. Engagement equals enforcement. By that I mean, when engaging the wider society, we Christians should enforce our beliefs through political power that enables us to enact coercive legislation that enforces our beliefs over everyone else, even if they hold different beliefs, right? So this is the enforcement. Engagement equals enforcement that defines, I think, the modern pro-life movement. And then the third twist that adds on top of that, because if you believe really engagement, it boils down to the power of enforcement, then it gets you into single issue politics, that all Christian political commitments should be determined by, does this acquire for us the political power to enforce our worldview over the rest of society? So moral absolutism, engagement equals enforcement, and single issue politics. I want to see if we can untangle these a little bit, and I want to work backwards. I don't know if we're going to get all the way back to all the way to the first one, but I want to work backwards and start with single issue politics. Pete, you've talked to, because I know the kind of journalist you are, you've talked to a lot of evangelicals who hold this view of single issue politics. Describe the conversation for me. What are you saying? What are they saying? How do you try to untangle it with them?
Yeah, I have had those conversations. In fact, I've had one recently. Actually, it wasn't a conversation per se. It was on texting, and essentially the view of single issue voters, and for evangelicals, often they're single issue on abortion. It's pretty straightforward. They consider this primus inter pares, first among equals of all the issues. They do consider the act of abortion to be a heinous act, even maybe that it should be a crime. It's about the worst possible thing that could happen or that they could envision. And so they feel like no Christian could in good conscience vote for somebody who is pro-choice. And if you have a pro-life candidate, that almost regardless of anything else that individual has said or done, as long as they are good on abortion, that they're pro-life, that overwhelms every other issue, and they really don't have to go too much further or take too many other things into account. They may wish that certain pro-life candidates would be better on other issues, but that doesn't really, in the end of the day, matter to them. So that's their cast of mind.
So how do you engage with them? How would you talk to them about why that may not be the most helpful, right way to tackle this issue?
Yeah, I mean, the way I do it is severalfold. One is that I raise some of these other issues, like, for example, what do you think the penalty should be for a woman or a doctor with abortion? What do you consider about spontaneous abortions? Are those the same thing as the death of a child? To try and sort of probe whether they actually, the rape and incest exceptions and so forth, to see whether they thought through the issue clearly enough, and do they actually really believe their own rhetoric, which is that this is murder. So that's one line of argument, conversation that I have. And the other one is that to explore the practical manifestations of abortion and abortion politics. So let me give a concrete example, which I think is a bit of a challenge to pro-lifers as it relates to always supporting Trump. The reality is that if you go back really from to 1980, the person who is president doesn't have much influence at all on the number, rate, and ratio of abortions. In fact, the number, rate, and ratio of abortions has gone down significantly more under Democratic presidents than Republican presidents. Now, you don't even have to believe in cause and effect for in terms of as you think it through, but it is a relevant issue if you think that if I vote for Donald Trump, I'm voting for fewer abortions, and if I'm voting for a Democrat for president, I'm voting for more abortions. That's just not empirically true. The number of abortions under Donald Trump went up 8%. The number of abortions during the 2 terms of Barack Obama declined by 28%. So by the end of Barack Obama's second term, the rate and ratio of abortions was lower than it was in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. So it's just not accurate, and it's sloppy to make the argument that I'm voting for Donald Trump because I'm voting to save the lives of unborn children. That's not how it's working out. Now, that raises the question of what is it that drives abortion numbers, and that itself is a really complicated issue. It may be contraception, which liberals are in favor of. It may be that at the state level that some kind of restrictions are being put into place, regardless of who's president. But it shatters the argument, as best I know. I haven't heard a compelling counter argument to it, which is that if you're voting for a Republican or Democrat as president, that is a decisive issue on whether you're going to have more or less abortions. I mean, the other thing I'd say, Curtis, is that the abortion story for pro-lifers is a wonderful story. At least it's a good, encouraging story. The numbers have dropped dramatically. Since the early 1990s. You had virtually 30 years of uninterrupted declines in abortion number, absolute number, rate, and ratio. As I said, that turned around under Trump. That went back up. And since the Dobbs decision, you've seen a sharp increase in the number of abortions. So it just goes to show that life is complicated and politics are complicated, and it can't be reduced to back to your bumper sticker arguments. And third thing I say is that what Donald Trump has done is he's basically turned the Republican Party into a pro-choice party, or it is more or less. He's certainly weakened its commitment to the pro-life cause. And that is something that no Democrat ever could have done. Not Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama, not Kamala Harris, not Joe Biden, not John Kerry, not Al Gore, not anybody. And I was warning Republicans back in 2016 about Donald Trump. And one of the things that I said is he's going to be able to change the Republican Party in a way that no Democrat can, precisely because he would have control of that party. And that's what we've seen happen. So if you really do care about the pro-life cause, the effect of having Donald Trump as president is what? Number of abortions went up. The public is more committed to the pro-choice cause than it ever has been in its history. The Republican Party is not nearly as strong a pro-life party as it was on the national level. It's getting to be de facto pro-choice. At least the leader of that party is using pro-choice language and arguments. And so the pro-life movement is at its weakest point since Roe was decided. Now, that's in large part because of Donald Trump or what's unfolded with Donald Trump being either president or the leader of the party. And then on top of that, you have to put all the other costs, all the other moral corruptions that come along with Trump. And my view is it worth it? And the answer is no. He's weakened the pro-life movement, and he's weakened democracy, and he's broken laws. And he's coarsened our political and civic discourse. So for me, this really isn't a hard call.
Yeah. Well, and just to maybe do one more level of untangling this twister arrangement, I think the other thing that people have to realize when they are making single issue politics as their guiding principle is that means you're putting that issue first above all other issues, right? That everything else is subordinated. And one of the things that you're subordinating is character. And I would argue that actually character matters more than somebody's statement of their issue position on something. Because actually, when you are making single issue politics, you are actually making a prior implicit judgment on character. You're saying this person is actually going to hold true to their stated position. And this is what your article was saying is Donald Trump's character actually displays somebody who is not going to hold true to their word. He has over and over double-crossed, betrayed one of his word. So when you are doing that, you are actually making a judgment. When you're making single issue politics, you're making an implicit, almost hidden judgment on character. And you ought to actually surface that and say, does this candidate actually warrant my trust in their character to actually hold true to this single issue that I care so much about?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, it was so obvious, and in particular, I would say with Donald Trump that his embrace of the pro-life movement was a completely utilitarian judgment, and if it became inconvenient for him, he would jettison it. And of course, others have made this argument, which is overturning Roe v. Wade was only the first step, but creating a pro-life culture is a very different and, in some respects, more difficult thing to do.
Totally.
So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, let's get to that. The last thing I just want to say on the single issue politics is the other thing to realize is when you boil everything down to a single issue, like abortion, you're actually prioritizing some lives over other lives. You're not actually making a I care about all lives, because issues touch different lives differently. So if you say, I'm going to prioritize abortion, okay, you can, again, in a logic that actually is contradicted by facts, but you can at least tell yourself, okay, I'm doing this to protect the lives of unborn. Okay, again, the statistics don't actually bear that out, but at least you can sort of tell yourself that story. But what you need to actually ask yourself, but what lives are actually threatened and jeopardized by this decision? For instance, the lives of Ukrainian children, right? Because Donald Trump very clearly is going to actually withdraw aid from Ukraine and put Ukraine children more at risk of Russian missiles, bombs, and God forbid, actual invasion and occupation. You might want to go down climate change and the lives of future unborn generations that will be more jeopardized because of climate change. If as you believe, as I do, that's a real thing. That's a real threat to human lives. And so it's not like you're choosing life. You're choosing some life and prioritizing it over other life when you practice single issue politics.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think it's a really very, very good point. It needs to be taken into account. And I think about the Global AIDS Initiative, PEPFAR initiative that right. President Bush advanced in 2003. And that has saved, over the decades, has been in place, roughly 25 million lives.
Amazing.
On the African continent. Now that had actually bipartisan support for most of its history, but within the last year or two, Republicans have undermined PEPFAR and taken steps to weaken it. And apropos your point, when's the last time that you heard evangelicals talk about, celebrate, call attention to the extraordinary human achievement of PEPFAR, the lives that have been saved, 25 million lives. That is tremendous. And what other areas in that domain, that arena, could be taken to try and save lives? So all of us are selective in our moral outrage and the issues that we care about. That's part of what it means to be human. But it is worth asking if all of your focus is on abortion, and again, not even on the number of abortions, but on stands on abortion. And that comes at the expense of other issues, or you're just not paying attention. Other ones, it means that something else is going on. The high moral ground that's often taken, people may believe it. They could well believe it, but that's not the only thing that's unfolding. Otherwise, their actions would lead them in some other directions.
Yeah, or at least moderate the rhetoric and moderate the
Right.
certainty, that realize, okay, I'm actually choosing to prioritize some lives over other lives by making this the end all and be all of all my politics. I want to get to the second twist that I talked about, which is the automatic equation that Christian engagement equals enforcement. Right? That Christian engagement with your beliefs means seeking political power to enact coercive legislation to enforce your views on the rest of the populace. And one way that I try to make sense of this, Pete, is to think in terms of biblical categories of how God seems to have ordained how a society ought to be influenced. And if we take how God designed Israel as a prototype, a blueprint about how societies ought to be influenced, you see three offices that are held in importance. It is the king, the prophet, and the priest. And by king, the king is the one who occupies the modes of enforcement. They can actually have the state-sponsored coercion to actually prohibit certain activities at the point of threat of violence even. And so that's the kingly power. The prophetic power, the prophetic role, is to shape the imagination. In fact, the prophets, by definition, do not have access, do not have control over political power. They are outside the political realm of coercion. And the only recourse they have is to shape people's, the culture, moral and spiritual imagination. That's the prophet role. The third role is the priestly role. And the role of the priest is actually to translate sort of high concepts, values, truths into the practical daily complexities of human life. The priest was the on-the-ground representative, so you will, if you will, of like, how does this work out in my specific situation that has all these different complexities and situations? The priest was the one to help them figure it out and do the best they can to apply God's truths to the specifics of individual human lives. All three are important and necessary, and they actually need to be held in unity, in alignment. And we know that because Jesus, theologically, we say Jesus is the true king, prophet, priest, that they are united, held together in Jesus. So that would follow that the body of Christ, right, the body of Jesus in this world, the church, also needs to hold all three of these roles in unity and in alignment. And that we run great risks if we put all of our chips on one of these roles and neglect the other. We're destroying the unity that God has designed and is represented in the unity of Jesus. And I think this actually is quite relevant for modern Christian politics, because if you look at 20th century Christian engagement of society, two examples really stand out. One negative example, one positive example. That I would say some of the biggest impacts the Christian church has made in American society and through politics: prohibition in the 1920s and the civil rights movement in the 60s. And in prohibition, you saw a overwhelming betting everything on the kingly role. There was a minority viewpoint around prohibition of alcohol, with a sort of a temporary coalition of white Catholics and white Protestants who also were really scared about immigrants, and then drink was kind of a code for immigrant pollution of American civic life, and they managed to pass the amendment. They did not succeed at all. In fact, they really tried in the prophetic role. They did not convince the wide American populace of the moral and spiritual worldview that would actually undergird prohibition. And so it was widely scoffed at. It was widely, and it created a backlash. It actually set back the movement of against alcoholism for years, because it unleashed this sort of libertine flouting of any regulation and restriction. And so it's a prime example, I think, of why you have to keep these things in balance. And it's interesting when you think about the movement against alcoholism, that actually the impact that Christians have made most on this is actually in the priestly realm. It's in the creation of AA and the 12-step program that actually works out this at a very individual, personal level, all of the complexities, all of the back and forths, with great grace and great attentiveness to that. These are hard issues, to work through. That I think it's undeniable that through the Christian influence in the AA movement, that they have prevented much more damage about alcohol than the prohibition ever even came close to accomplishing. So, Pete, what do you think about this way of thinking about how we ought to think about a more holistic form of engagement?
Oh, I think it's very insightful. I think you laid it out very, very well. I think that those categories work well. I think they're faithful, and and they underscore the complexities of human life and social change.
Mm,
And sometimes the way to go are laws. I mean, laws matter. Laws are moral teachers. Laws can restrict certain things. The civil rights movement was a moral movement,
yeah,
and Martin Luther King Jr. used religious language and changed hearts and changed minds. But in the end, there were also laws that were passed,
yeah,
by Lyndon Johnson as president, civil rights laws in 64 and 65. Sometimes the issues are really beyond the reach of law, and you have
yeah,
to change people's hearts and minds, and you have to take that into account as well. So there are prudential, pragmatic considerations, a degree of discernment that is involved. There has to be an understanding, I think, that not everything that Christians think is wrong should be illegal. And I do find that there's a lot of arbitrariness
yeah,
in what Christians decide they want to pass laws on and they don't want to pass laws on. For example, an awful lot of Christians think that same-sex marriage should be legal, or years before that they approved of sodomy laws, right?
yeah,
But what about divorce? What about
yeah,
divorce for non-biblical reasons?
yeah,
Should that be illegal? What about premarital sex? If you catch
yeah,
somebody, should that be the case? If you weighed sexual sins against, say, idolatry in the Bible, idolatry is much more serious.
yeah,
There are clear examples in society where you see idolatry happening. Should you pass laws against it? So that
yeah,
all gets very complicated. And then beyond that, it seems to me one has to think through, is the Christian teaching relevant to the Christian church or to the wider society? So in a lot of
yeah,
cases, Paul's overwhelming preoccupation wasn't with the non-Christian world. It
right,
was with Christians themselves, and
yeah,
how they were acting, whether their hearts were being transformed. And as you know, when you look historically at the rise of Christianity through the first 3 centuries, what was it that led to that movement becoming the dominant movement in what the known world at that time? It wasn't through political power, it wasn't through legislation, it wasn't through cultural dominance per se. It was communal care. Rodney Stark
yeah,
has written about this, so have others. It's the fact that the church um, helped people who were diseased, who were poor, who were ill. They treated women with respect. They cared for infants and the young. And the power of that witness is what won over so
yeah,
many unbelievers. It wasn't through coercion. It wasn't through legislation. So all of that stuff has to be taken into account. Again, I want to come back to my first point. I mean, laws matter, and
yeah,
Christians have every right to try and leave their imprimatur on laws,
yeah,
because Christianity in the end cares about justice, and that's one of the
yeah,
ways that justice is achieved, or justice is impeded. So that stuff matters, but you really do need discernment in which to do it. Just one other thing, Curtis, that I want to mention in all of this, which is, um, you know, Christians are always being watched in these efforts, and
mm,
I don't think that there's any question right now that the way in which an awful lot of people in the evangelical world and Christians more broadly have engaged in politics and culture and, has done a profound disservice to the Christian faith. It's just turned off a lot of people. They see the harshness, they see the hypocrisy, they see the cynicism,
yeah,
they see the kind of will to power ethic that takes
yeah,
over when they feel like that they want to get their person, their candidate, or their cause into effect. And all of a sudden, the fruit of the Spirit gets inverted.
Yeah.
And many of the most anxious and angry and hate-filled people are those who claim to be followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the effect that that has on a watching world is enormous, and it's negative. And that needs to stop because Eugene Peterson talked about the Jesus truth and the Jesus way. And you can't jettison the Jesus way in order to advance what you believe to be the Jesus truth. And I think that's happened too much. And that's why what we've witnessed in the last several years in particular is a kind of a grief, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I think applying this distortion that happens when you lose the Jesus way that holds in alignment and unity with what I'm calling the kingly, prophetic, and priestly engagement modes is I think you see backlash, you see resentment build up because of that. I mean, I use the example of prohibition as one example, but I think people need to realize that how much the modern American pro-life movement, I don't know, I don't have a percentage, but the massive, like 98% of resources, energy goes to the kingly route. It goes to securing political power. You would be very hard pressed to name any meaningful prophetic engagement that actually, seeks to persuade the broader culture of a pro-life worldview that is comprehensible to non-Christians, right? I mean, you'd be very hard. I can't name anything. I mean, ironically, one of the most effective expressions of this prophetic view was by a secular pro-choice movie maker Diablo Cody, who, I don't know if you've ever seen the 2007 movie Juno. I recommend it to any viewers. It is I'll just say it is made by a secular pro-choice movie maker, and it is the most compelling picture of a pro-life worldview because the protagonist, Juno, played by Ellen Page, he just describes it in a very respectful human way of her decision not to have an abortion. It's a remarkable movie. It won actually the 2007 Oscar for best screenplay. But it took a non-Christian. It took somebody who's actually pro-choice to portray that worldview as comprehensible, as compelling, and actually she's the moral center of the entire movie. But you can't find any other kind of equivalent effort to actually prevent a prophetic engagement of the moral, spiritual imagination. And then even as somebody who's worked at that priestly case in terms of these sort of crisis pregnancy centers, I mean, these are incredibly underfunded, scraping by. They don't get a lot of funding. They've frankly, as a movement, have stagnated with a few exceptions. I'll shout out to Claris Health on the West Coast and Avail on the East Coast, but they're stuck in very outdated modes, equipment. It's totally stagnant because they just haven't gotten any investment or funding into that effort. And so we've put everything, the modern pro-life movement put everything in this kingly bucket, and it's backfiring. I think what you are finding is that prohibition effect where people resent a coercive effect which they have not been persuaded by through prophetic means, and they don't see the priestly care being expressed on the ground.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I want to sort of double click on that, which is it should be said, and you said it, but I want to echo it, which is the tremendous good work that people in the pro-life movement have done with crisis pregnancy centers and other things on the ground. And the reality is that for a variety of reasons, it's not covered. I mean, the media doesn't cover the quiet, gentle, loving, life-giving actions that a lot of pro-life people are doing. And these people are very sincere. There's a sacrifice to what they're doing of time and of energy. They believe in the cause, and it's a worthy cause to believe in. So that's going on as well, and those people should be lauded and applauded. But unfortunately, there are some people who seem to be captivated by the culture war itself, and they know they get attention, and they delight in it. But that attention that they get, to some degree, occludes some of the really impressive and humane work that's going on the ground.
Yeah. And Pete, I want to also double click. This is not at all what I'm saying is at all not to actually, like you've said, to diminish the necessity of a kingly engagement on laws. Like you said, laws really matter, but it does take a really important discernment to say when and how you do that has to be aligned with what you have done and accomplished in these other lanes. So to take the civil rights movement, for example, you rightly pointed out the importance of the 1965, Civil Rights Act was the cornerstone of modern civil rights movement. That happened 10, 15 years after a long, very sacrificial engagement at the prophetic level. That did not involve passing laws, but just involved prophetic acts like sit-ins, counter demonstrations at segregated lunch counters, marches, bus boycotts. These were all prophetic acts that ultimately transformed the American moral and spiritual landscape, such that the laws then made sense. It actually had consensus. There was a sense that, of course, not everybody agreed with it, but a majority of folks agreed with it, and that's what sustained it. And I actually think that this sort of need to maintain a unity and alignment actually explains not just the setbacks that the pro-life movement is experiencing, where it's losing all of these ballot measures at the state level because of this backlash. I think it explains a lot of movements. I think it explains the civil rights movement, because I would say that where the civil rights movement has succeeded first in the prophetic route, and then I think succeeded in the kingly route in terms of these legislation, where I believe it has actually failed is actually in the priestly lane in terms of translating truths and principles of racial justice and equality into the very complex realities of organizational life in institutions, in higher education, in corporations. The civil rights version of the priestly route is DEI, and both at the academic level, it has been proven to actually not work and actually create backlash, make people have worse racial attitudes in some ways, but it also creates resentment, because actually what many people experience DEI, and I would count myself in this, as kind of like a soft kingly power garbed in priestly robes, right. Where you're actually, there isn't actually room for exploration, dialogue, exploration of complexities. You're just actually told this is the right way to think, believe, speak, and so forth. And people resent that. And I think it's costing the modern civil rights movement in ways that are really dangerous. And you're seeing it in backlash against even achievements made in this realm.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of work has to go into place for laws to be passed, and for laws to have the effect that you want them to.
The game of Twister will go on. And Pete, thank you for joining us to bring your customary thoughtfulness and reflectiveness to this conversation. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. It's always great to be on with you, Curtis, and thanks for your insights and for the spirit with which you approach these things. It's an encouragement to a lot of us.
Thanks, Pete. All right, listeners. Well, we are strapped in for the rest of this election season. Keep coming back every week to help each other make sense of this world, and we will once again gather around the campfire.